It had gotten out of control, and the problem was going to drive this entire industry into the ground. This bill is a step forward.
A step forward, and no longer a bill. It is now the law. A very proud Governor Henry McMaster signing into law this past week a reform plan when it comes to liquor liability. So many businesses in the last 8 years or so have gone out of business because of the rising costs of liability insurance. We have talked about that almost every Sunday morning here in South Carolina as we get you connected to the Capitol this week. We are a person down this week, though. Catherine Glenn Foster having some travel difficulties. Dave Wilson is here.
That weather, Taylor talked about the weather over the weekend. It was... it got better. It got better, but it was not good when we were getting ready for this show. We do miss Catherine here today.
We do.
But it's good to be with you this Sunday morning.
Sure
we can
is.
actually talk this early in Sunday morning.
Well, that's true. Maybe you got into liquor liability. I don't know. But that's something we've talked about a lot. I'm not kidding. I think every week since January, since we started looking at issues, we talked about liquor liability in South Carolina, I think every single week. At least for a few seconds. We committed entire segments to it.
Yeah, we did.
We've reached somewhat of a finish line here. Let's talk about the plan that was signed into law, because everyone that spoke at that news conference the other day said we're not done yet.
They're not done yet because they only addressed the beginning sections of the issue. And that was what is preeminent right now for what you're seeing in local restaurants and local businesses across the state of South Carolina. More than 5,000 businesses have shut down over the last several years because the cost of doing business has been so absolutely high, because liquor liability insurance is something that could be anywhere from $10,000 to $25,000 to $30,000 a month. And when you think about that, that's a lot of food, beer, wine, liquor that has to be sold at a restaurant to not only, Brian, support the business, but to pay for the staff. And we had Chris Fitz from the Hollow here in Columbia. We had him on a few weeks ago, and if you haven't caught that Connect to the Capitol Extra, please make sure that you do that, because he did a great job of explaining what does this mean when you take a look at how a business even thinks about growing. As you heard at the beginning of the show here, Senator Johnson said we have made a step forward by reducing the amount of insurance costs for businesses if they're doing certain things. Training for the employees. Do they close a little bit sooner?
Close by midnight.
Right. And so that has a huge impact on what goes on with business. And business can be doing those things that actually allow them to reduce their costs.
Significantly. Because before they had to carry minimum of a $1 million liability insurance. Now it's knocked back to $500,000.
Right.
If they do some of the things you just mentioned.
And it's just very familiar with what you're used to when you take a look at, do you have a good driving record? Do you have that little thing that you put in your car that measures how much your driving is? And those are things that are being done right now that allow businesses to say, we'll be good, responsible members of our community. Please lower our rates. But Brian, the big issue that we're facing right now is that took care of half the issue. The other half is, how are we going to handle other things that have to do with insurance and insurance reform in South Carolina, which is really what the Senate, because they debated
spent
this.
A month talking.
They spent a month talking about this. So they have taken the first bite at the apple. Do not be surprised if they don't come back. Probably not in January to deal with this issue again, because there are a lot of other things, but expect in future legislative sessions that they're going to be tackling much larger issues. The House handled the entire issue in a day.
And passed it without any opposition.
Right, and so what you saw with the Senate was the long deliberative process of what are we going to be doing on all of the different aspects of insurance, liability. When you've got both the injured, you've got the insurance company, you've got the lawyers, and in the middle, you and me and the rates that we pay and the cost of going out to dinner.
Yeah.
And that's really what
and the people who are serving you your dinner. They get to stay on the job.
They do. And that's a huge part, because you remember what it was like during COVID when you had restaurants and bars that could not remain open, and so many of them shut down. And then this was on top of it. This is hopefully a good first step in keeping one of the major industries in South Carolina, which is the hospitality industry, keeping them in business.
Absolutely. Seeing that's one thing that was signed into law this week. Marcus, we had one more item, too, signed into law this week. Got another soundbite from that.
any sort of intimate picture of someone without their consent, either to cause them harm or not. You just do it. It is a crime in South Carolina.
But this is the kind of thing that the average individual now, with just a pretty cheap subscription or a handful of software tools, can make very convincing fake images.
What we're talking about here is what's known as revenge porn. People posting intimate pictures of man, woman, child, whatever it is, real photos in some cases, posting them in the public venue, and now we have AI-generated photos they can do this with. If you do that, it is now a felony here in South Carolina. First offense, you can go to prison for 5 years. Second offense, 10 years. That's more than the federal law.
That is a huge step forward. And this is the second step when dealing with revenge porn. Because you'll remember a few years back, Representative Guffey out of the York County area had a teenage son, sent an illicit photo, and somebody turned around and used it as revenge porn. He, unfortunately, it was a devastating thing. He took his own life when he realized what had gone on. And that level of sheer embarrassment of having to deal with that was a move that ended up making a unanimous move of passing a law in the state of South Carolina that made revenge porn illegal. Representative Guffey has now gone on and been pushing the same sort of thing in Washington, D.C. It was up at the White House not that long ago.
The Take It Down Act.
The Take It Down Act. And that is the place where you're seeing the porn industry and all of its different pieces and parts, the amateur side, the professional side, now coming and now getting some pushback, which is a very important thing. I mean, Catherine has talked about this issue before on previous shows, and we are here looking at this issue right now because this is the next step. Brian, when you think about what goes on with artificial intelligence, when we talk about AI, this is computer-generated images, and they're so realistic.
And they can attack every one of us, me, you.
They can take
anyone.
They can take a photo of you and put it on somebody else's body. Now, here's for some people that might not be a bad thing if you're, don't like your shape. It's Sunday morning still. We'll still be good about that one. But this is a place that you are seeing. Some people are taking that one step further. They're finding pornographic images. They're finding pornographic videos, and they're overlaying people's faces onto other people.
Just to embarrass them.
Keep in mind, you get a felony in the state of South Carolina. Not only are you going to be going to prison, but you're going to be carrying that for life. And that is something that is very much a deterrent, and the state of South Carolina has now made it even more so. So that's important.
Big move, for sure. But that's another one that will evolve over time as technology does. They just got to stay ahead of the curve.
Exactly.
When we come back here on Connect to the Capitol, we're talking money matters, as always, at the State House. All right, lawmakers went back to work this past week for what was likely the last day of the year because they had a big item on their to-do list. They had to pass the state budget. That $14.5 billion spending plan they're required to pass by law before the fiscal year begins here in July. They did it. With a lot of good things in it. Money for roads, we like to hear that. Money for teacher raises, we like to hear that. Those are all great things. But there is one particular thing that people are talking about. The lawmakers gave themselves a raise. Significant one, too, Dave Wilson.
They did get a significant raise off of this. What they ended up doing, so let's break some numbers down for you real quick. When you start taking a look at what a legislator makes, they make $10,500 a year as a legislator. You break that down into the 3 days a week they're here for the 18 weeks that they're here, and what you end up finding very quickly is they make about $19.44 an hour.
Yep.
Okay? When you take that, they also used to have $1,000 a month for in-district expenses, going to events, being involved in different things that are going on, sponsorships. They've now taken that in-district expense from $1,000 to $2,500 a month. That's somewhat understandable. When you think about what you have to do, the price of gas has gone up since this last increase has taken place. The ability to get from one place to another, the ability to meet with constituents and do the work that has to be done, those are important things. And the pay raise for the legislators, they haven't seen one in decades.
Yeah.
And
a lot of other things have increased, though, as you know.
A lot of them have. So you break these numbers down. you're roughly talking about $3 million out of a $14.5 billion state budget. No sane legislator is going to turn around, Brian, and vote themselves a pay raise. But what they did was they voted an increase to their stipend, which is kind of like a pay raise.
Kind of is.
But they didn't change the actual base pay of what they get. So this does two things, Brian. One, it makes being a legislator, keeping in mind that you have to go back and forth from your home or you have to stay here in town to be able to do the work of the legislature for the 18 weeks that they're here from January through May, plus whenever they have to come back for other meetings throughout the rest of the year. So when they did this, no one was really expecting this. It had not been in a House budget discussion. It hadn't been in a Senate budget discussion.
And it kind of snuck in there.
So what ends up happening is when the House and Senate do their thing, it ends up going to what's called a conference committee. So they've got 3 members of the House, 3 members of the Senate, and those 6 members go into a room and they go through line by line by line the entire budget. And when they did that this time, they did add in an additional $1,500 a month to their in-district expense account.
Yep.
That ends up helping to pay for people who work in the area, but it also does put money into the pockets of our legislators. Keep in mind, that's roughly $40,000 a year that they make. That could, theoretically, expand the ability for some people who cannot run for office to at least give it consideration, because you keep in mind, this is not a full-time job, and it's not full-time job pay.
But it sure feels like one.
There are plenty of times it feels like one. And I think that's really when you're looking at this, it's one of the reasons they did it, plus the cost of living and the cost of everything has definitely gone up.
Some other things, I guess, that'll maybe help folks feel better about this. They did approve an income tax reduction from 6.2% to 6%.
Right.
That high rate down to 6%. That's probably music to some folks' ears. The
Does help.
teacher raises went through to keep that on an accelerating scale.
Yeah, keep in mind that we were at $40,000. They've been stepping it up. They went to $48,500 a year. So at least the teachers now making more than the state legislator.
Way ahead of
schedule. So the plan is in the next budget, they're going to be taking that number, Brian, up to $50,000, which definitely keeps South Carolina's starting teacher pay well above the Southeast average. For decades, though, it has been sitting at the bottom.
We got to take care of our teachers. Every one of us has a favorite one that made a lasting impact in our lives, and they deserve every penny they get.
And Jane Rhodes.
He's got 2. See?
I know who they were.
He's got 2. So there we go. But we're going to go to break here in a second here on Connect to the Capitol. We're talking about the death penalty coming up next. We do have another execution that's been set in this state. We now know how that inmate has chosen to be executed, but there's still controversy swirling around that. More on that when we come back. The death penalty here in South Carolina. The state is poised to carry out its 6th execution since September. That man on your screen, Stephen Stanko, convicted double murderer, convicted rapist, just days ago, chose to die by lethal injection. That is the law in this state. There are 3 methods: lethal injection, firing squad, electric chair. Death row inmates have their choice of which method. And both lethal injection and firing squad have been, let's just say, faced with many questions in recent months.
They have been. When you take a look, the lethal injection of Marion Bowman was a prime example. Marion Bowman was a very large man, not fat. He just was well built. And the question was, how long did it take for that execution to take place? Were there enough drugs? Were there other complications that went along with that? And then, of course, we've had the controversy that has seemingly come up following the execution, Brian, that you witnessed.
Of Michael Motti.
And Motti, the question was the target placed in the right spot? Did it do what it was supposed to do? How many holes were there? So there were a lot of questions that came up from that. The autopsy came back. It has not, though, been fully released.
It has not been. And that is something that the man who prosecuted the Motti case, Solicitor David Pasco, has said, please, Governor, release the full report, because I am confident it will put away any questions that there are about this. You know, I don't know anything about autopsies. I don't know anything about...
You didn't get to watch Quincy as a kid?
Well, I did.
Okay.
I did. But I couldn't perform one if I had to. All I know is what I saw in the death chamber that day when Michael Motti was put to death. It did appear something was not going according to what the plan, I won't say protocol, what the plan was,
Right.
because it's expected that if everything hits the mark, the condemned is gone within seconds.
Right.
15 seconds at the max. It was close to a minute. Anyone that witnessed it can tell you that. But without being someone who knows anything about anatomy or anyone who can conduct an autopsy, I can't tell you if the bullets hit where they were supposed to hit.
And so that becomes the question whether or not what they end up doing in the process of doing this, a doctor goes and listens for the heart,
Yep.
and then places a target. You saw them place a target
Yep.
over the heart, and that is where 3 sharpshooters,
Expert marksmen,
are then trained to then fire into the center of the target. Apparently 2 of them fired into the exact same spot at the exact same time, and that ended up bringing question as to what went on. But the Supreme Court has now turned around and said everything
moving
was fine,
forward.
we're moving forward. But I have talked to people who do work and do ministry work on
Yeah.
death row. And Brian, the thing that has been so concerning is for the folks who are on death row, they've heard about lengthy death. They have heard about were the drugs doing enough. When Catherine had Reverend Hillary Taylor on here, she's actually been in conversations for years with Stephen Stanko.
Yeah.
And those conversations, it's very difficult sometimes because we're actually talking about another human being, but unfortunately a person who's also taken another person's life, because that's the only way you end up on death row is by taking another human life. And in this particular case, the folks on death row are sitting there going, what's going to happen to me when it's my turn? Am I going to have a prolonged death like Motti? Is it going to be something that ends up happening because the drugs weren't enough? Were they too much? And that level of question has put a lot of those folks on death row in a bit of a very tenuous and heartfelt difficulty in making that decision of which of the 3 ways of execution am I going to choose.
Stephen Stanko's execution now set for June the 13th, Broad River Correctional, where death row is, here in Columbia.
That's Friday.
It is a Friday, yes. June the 13th, always a Friday.
Right.
A Friday evening they do those. When we come back, we look ahead to the road to 2026, something we've been talking about a lot here on Connect to the Capitol.
I have a message for you. I want other potential victims to know that I have your back.
Congresswoman Nancy Mace, that right there was about the only thing she said when she wasn't reading from a lawsuit in front of her. She called a press conference on Thursday afternoon about a lawsuit that has been filed by a Jane Doe against her former fiancé and several of his friends, alleging some things having to do with misconduct.
Right.
The news conference consisted of her just reading the lawsuit. We know that she's talked a lot about being a victim. We know she has been.
Right.
And can be a voice for other people who can come out of the dark and say, this happened to me too.
Right.
Every week, though, we've seen something where she has taken this public position to talk about this issue.
And so let's just break down. One of the reasons why this is going on is the word around, and it is becoming very, very evident. Nancy Mace is probably one of the 5 or 6 contenders on the Republican Party side who is giving consideration to run for governor. And if that's the particular case of what's going to be going on, this is keeping her name in the forefront. Unfortunately, when you spend an entire press conference reading a lawsuit,
Took no questions.
that right there just doesn't feel quite right. It ends up feeling like you're using your political position.
It feels personal.
Right. And let's not be wrong. When you're dealing with a situation of sexual assault or like we talked
That
about
is
earlier,
very
with
personal.
revenge porn and things along those lines, that's a very, very personal thing. And the issues that have gone on with her former fiance. But Brian, she also took this argument to the House floor.
She did earlier this year.
She's now taking this to a House subcommittee where she's displaying photos of herself. She's now taking this lawsuit and she's having a press conference to read the lawsuit. Something doesn't necessarily feel right about this. Former consultants of hers have come out and said,
They have.
This is very indicative of the type of personality that she's got. no knock on the fact that she's wanting other women to come out, other victims to appear
And hold the people accountable.
Right.
Yeah.
That's an important thing that has to be done. This is also, though, we're talking about it right now, putting her name out there, and she will be a contender in 2026 for the race for governor in South Carolina.
Yeah. Someone else she's faced in the past launched a campaign this week. We got a quick snippet from their newly launched campaign ad, but against a different opponent. Go ahead, Marcus.
Lindsey Graham has been a senator for half my lifetime. And as it turns out, most senators don't get better with age.
They hate my guts.
Will winning this race be easy? No. But you can't win if you don't run.
Dr. Annie Andrews, a pediatrician, has run against Nancy Mace in 2022 and lost.
Right.
Now wants to run against Lindsey Graham.
So she's a Democrat she's yet another Democrat who's thrown their hat in the ring. Being from this industry, in the production and television industry,
that was a
very well produced piece.
There's a lot of money there.
There is, and if there's a lot of money in that level of production, you've got to know and understand that there's a lot of money that is going to be going into this race. You take a look at what's gone out on social media when that came out. People are saying, "Where can I give? Where can I give?" Because there is an angst against Lindsey Graham.
Yeah,
there's a growing angst on both the Democratic side, but also a group of Republicans who are very anti-Lindsey Graham. You can go to a Trump rally, Lindsey Graham's there, they'll cheer for Trump, but they'll boo Lindsey Graham. But again, let's just rewind the clock.
There was a lot of money spent in the past against Lindsey Graham.
$130 million that Jamie Harris raised. Jamie Harrison had raised as a former chairman of the South Carolina Republican Party, but he lost by 250,000 votes. This is a very Republican-leaning state. The question is going to be, will there be enough people who are saying, I don't like Lindsey Graham, but I'll give this woman a consideration? And that becomes an issue of the numbers in Washington, D.C., because as you and I both know, if you're not in the majority in Washington, D.C., you're really kind of sitting on the sidelines.
Outside looking in. As we talk about Democrats, this was their weekend, state Democratic Party weekend. They brought in some big guns, some big speakers. Former VP candidate Tim Walz, and also a rising star in the Democratic Party, Governor of Maryland, Wes Moore. We heard from both of them quickly, Marcus.
We don't come here to win elections to celebrate on election night, although that is fun. We like doing that. We win elections so that we can improve people's lives. We don't win elections to hold on to that political capital. We win elections to burn it, to improve lives.
I cannot tell you a voice that has had more impact, more focus, driven more change, not just for this country as a whole, but for all of us individually, the way that James Clyburn has done.
That is a big, big tribute to a man who's got a big, big role to play.
Lifetime of service.
Lifetime of service. But also, Brian, let's keep in mind one thing. Jim Clyburn made Joe Biden.
He sure did. He gave him, he breathed new life into his campaign.
And in 2020, keep in mind, Joe Biden had lost in Iowa. He had lost in New Hampshire. He came to South Carolina. Jim Clyburn put every bit of support behind him. And in doing so, Brian, took him from a maybe he can do something and absolutely launched that campaign in 2020. And that's what Jim Clyburn does, keeping in mind that South Carolina, 11 out of the last 12 presidential elections, has chosen the nominee for both parties.
Yes.
South Carolina is vital in this, and Jim Clyburn, as Wes Moore just brought out, is extremely valuable and very vital to making that happen for the nominees on the Democratic side.
Could the next nominee be that man you just heard from on the Democratic Party, Wes Moore? He says he has no intentions of running for president, but...
Okay, let's just be honest. You can
say
that all you want.
They all say that.
They all say that.
So that's a stay tuned.
Right.
But of course, the tribute to James Clyburn is always well-deserved. He is a kingmaker in political circles, so who knows?
And that's why we have this show here.
Yeah.
Because as these things happen, as we get into 26 in the gubernatorial race, right after that, keep in mind, every presidential candidate, because both parties
coming through,
are going to be having wide open nominations. So it's going to be a great time to be in the state of South Carolina.
That's right. Each and every Sunday, we'll make sure we keep getting you connected. Dave, thank you as always. We miss Catherine this
We do
week.
miss her this week.
We'll have her next week. Everyone, have yourself a great week.
Have a great weekend.